Today's daf, we're going to be learning a Shevuot daf Mem Gimel. Today's daf is sponsored by Binyamin Cohen. To wish Mazel Tov to Caroline using Berkowitz on completing Shas. We're inspired by your amazing accomplishment and dedication to learning. Mazel Tov. And we're happy to have Caroline celebrating with us her Siyum Shas at the Siyum. So if you haven't registered, please register. And with that, I will wish everyone a very safe day. And it's not a bit of a challenging day here. In fact, I'm recording early because I don't really know what's going to be later. So with that, we will get started, and hopefully I will finish the shiur in time. Okay, we're going to start with, we're at this Mishnah about all the things that you can't take oaths about, okay, whether it's slaves or documents or land, or land or hekdesh, sanctified items. And we saw the drasha about kefel, how we know the double payment, you don't have to pay. And we said we darshan the klal prat klal. We're going to see a few more of those today. So now we're going to get to lo tashlumei kefel v'lo tashlumei arba v'chamisha, the 4 or 5 times payment, which you pay if you steal and slaughter an animal or steal and sell it. My time, or why don't you pay that? Well, tashlumei arba v'chamisha, marachmana v'zol tashlumei shlosha v'arba. The tashlumei arba v'chamisha is made up of also the kefel payment. One of those payments is because of the double payment for just stealing. And that already we said you're exempt from. So if you'd be exempt from the kefel, it would drop it down to 3 or 4, and there is no such thing as a 3 or 4 payment. It's only 4 or 5, and therefore you must be exempt. For again, if it's those items which there's no kefel, then there's obviously no tashlumei arba v'chamisha. Shomer chinami no nishba. So a person who's watching something for free doesn't take an oath. Normally they would take an oath if it was stolen. They would have to take an oath, and then they'd be free, right? They'd be exempt. Menanimile, where do we get this from? Ditanu Rabbanit, as says in a bright. Ki yitain isha le'ehu klal kesef o kelim prat lishmor chazar v'kalal. So again, we have a pasuk, which is you give your friend, that's anything. Then it says money or a vessel, that's or vessels, that's a detail. Then we have lishmor, to watch, that's general again. Chazar v'kalal. So therefore, once they have prat, klal, klal prat klal, yet hadan elakena prat. Ma prat meforash davar mitatel v'gufo mamon, av kol davar mitatel v'gufo mamon. So what do we say? Just like the detail, this is exactly the same as before, is something movable and it has inherent value. Likewise, anything that's movable and has inherent value. Yatsu karkot she'metaltalin, so out go land, which isn't movable. Yatsu avadim shushula karkot, out go slaves because they're compared to land, as we saw yesterday. Yatsu shtelot, shafa pisha metaltalin, ein gufa mamon, even though they're movable, they don't have any inherent value. The value of the paper isn't worth anything. And hekdesh re'eu. Hekdesh is out because it says to your friend. Nosei sachar no mishalem. Minam. Where do we get the nosei sachar? If you're getting paid to watch, how do you know that you're exempt from the oath also, right? In the case where it was onus and you're supposed to take an oath. Ditanu Rabbanan, ki yitain isha re'eu klal. Again, starting the same way. Person gives a friend, klal, chamor, oshor, oseh, prat. These are the psukim about the shomer sachar. You give an animal to watch and they detail a donkey, an ox, or a sheep. Now, here, how do we know this is about a shomer sachar? It never says this person gets paid, and never said before that in the shomer chinam they didn't get paid, but we learned about Metzia, they darshan that since people normally watch kesef or kelim, they're willing to watch them for free, but they're not usually willing to watch an animal for free because that's a lot of work to deal with the animal. Anyway, going back to the pasuk, the drasha b'chol behema lishmor, any animal you watch, that's already klal, general, chazar v'kalal, klal pratu klal, ad hekdesh re'eu. Now this time they don't even bother repeating the whole slew of things. They just say, oh yeah, go back to what we said before until you get to hekdesh re'eu, and basically we have all the same exemptions. Rabbi Meir. Now we go to the next section of the Mishna where Rabbi Meir said if you had vines that were full of grapes, you would not, that would be considered not like land. That would be actually movables. So Rabbi Meir, and here's the quote, Yesh dvarim shehen kikarka ve'einam kikarka. There's some things that are like land, but they're not really like land. Or bikarka. There's a different girsa here. We read it before as they're in the land, but they're not considered like land. Okay. And now we're basically saying things attached to the ground basically are not considered attached to the ground, right? They're not considered like the land itself. Michlal, so from here you can infer to Rabbi Meir Savar, kolam mechubar l'karka, eno kikarka. It sounds like Rabbi Meir holds. Anything attached to the ground is not considered like the ground, meaning what is like the ground? What does it mean karka? The land itself. But it sounds like he's saying anything growing is not. But if that's the case, why they say them vines full of grapes? It should have been just plain vines, also are considered not attached, not like the land itself, right? So I'm a Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina. Now we're going to understand the machloket better. The machloket is actually about grapes that are about to be picked. The Rabbi Meir savar kibtzurotam. And Rabbi Meir says it's as if they're already picked because they're ripe and ready. So even though they're attached to the ground, they could be detached in a minute, and therefore we view them as detached. But Rabbanan savre lo kibtzurotam. They're not considered detached from the ground until you actually detach them, right? As long as they're attached, they're attached. Okay, now we said only things that are measurable, and then the Mishnah proceeded to give an example, and it said, for example, if I say I gave you a whole house or a whole bag of money, and you said, I don't know what you're talking about, but whatever's here is yours, patur, you're exempt. That's not measurable items. But if you say zeomer adaziz, zeomer adachalon chayav, but if I said I gave you a house full up until the protrusion, and you said no, you gave me a house full up until the window, that would be moda b'miktzat. So now we're going to try to understand this. We're going to Machloket Abaye and Rava exactly about this case. Amar Abaye, lo shanu elad amar lebayit stam. It's only if you said a house, because that can't be measured. Aval amar lo bayit zemale yediyat anta. If I say I gave you this house full, well, we know exactly how full, how much produce we're talking about because it's the house full. So you can measure that. I'm like Rava. Rava says that can't possibly be because then the Mishnah is giving two very different cases. They should have brought that case as well. So let's explain. Rava says, if that's the case, that if I said this specific houseful, it would be something measurable and you'd be obligated an oath. Well, Adatani Seifa, when it gives the case that you are obligated an oath, this one says to the protrusion, this one says to the window. It should have said there, what are we talking about? When there's a full house. But if you said this house full, you'd be obligated. And the fact they didn't say that seems to prove you must be wrong, because that would have been a much more obvious case to compare bayit stam and bayit zeh, and not bayit stam and till the protrusion till the window. So Ella Amar Rava, how does Rava understand the cases in the Mishnah? And what the case would be? It's not only the claim has to be that way, but the admission has to be that way. And what was the problem in this case? You said, oh, the person said, whatever you gave me. Now that's not, you have to state it in a measured form. That's not a measured form. And even the house, you could say, if I say I have a house full of people, it doesn't mean every single inch is taken by the house. So if I say I have a house, I give you a house full of produce, it doesn't necessarily mean exactly until the ceiling. It could mean a few inches below the ceiling. Okay, so that's why also it needs to be specified the measurement. And this is not a specified measurement, not houseful, and also not whatever is here. Okay, you didn't specify any sort of measurement. Whereas if you say until the window or until the protrusion, that already is a much more clear, can be measured. And Tani Kapateta, Rabbi, here's a brighter like Rabbi. Kor tfu'ah libiyadcha. I gave you a core of tu'ah, of grains. Halal in the chaviyadi. I don't know what you're talking about. You didn't give me anything. Patur. Okay, that's your patur because there's no admission. Menorah gdola yesh libiyadcha. I gave you a large candelabra. In the chaviyadi la menorah ktana. I only give you a small candelabra. Patur. Because menorah gdola, menorah ktana. Sorry, you only gave me a small menorah. Those are two different things. Okay, one's a big one, one's a small one. We're not talking about the same menorah. And likewise with a belt. I gave you a large belt, and you only gave me a small belt. Also, patur, you be exempt. But if I said I gave you a core tfuah and you said you only gave me half a core, which is a letech, then you'd be obligated. Or menorah bat 10 litrin yesh li biyadcha, en lecha biyadi ela bat 5 litrin chayav. But if you say a menorah that's 10 liters, I gave you, and you said I gave you one that's 5 litrin. Okay, litrin is a measurement. Okay, it's not a liter like that, but okay, a kind of measurement, a measurement of 10, and I said it was only a measurement of 5, chayav. That would be. Now we're going to have to understand, we'll get back to this, why is that different from the large and small menorah? Klaloshal davar, but here the Braita continues, and this is where we see it holds like Rava. The general principle is you have to state a measured amount and the person has to admit to a measured amount. What could that be coming to include? If not, it must be saying houseful, that case of the houseful, and then that would prove Rava. Now they just go back and explain this case of the Braita. What's the difference between the two, right? Why does that, why menorah gdola, menorah ktana doesn't work, right? You don't have to do an oath because mashtano lo hodalo, mashadalo lo tano. One was talking about this candelabra, one was talking about a different candelabra. Well, ihachi bat eser bat chamesh nami, mashtano lo hodalo, mashodalo lo tano. Same thing with the 5 and the 10. So Amar Shmuel bar Yitzchak, hacha benorah shel chuliot askinan. So Shmuel bar Yitzchak, this is the first answer. It's a menorah that's in parts. So you could have taken out, right? One says it had all the parts in it, and one said, no, you only gave it to me with some of the parts. But, right, the kamod lamine. And then you're basically talking about the same item, and you're just admitting to only part. Then the Gemara says, maybe the life bait. Why don't we say the same thing with a belt and say that it's a case where there's chunks of a belt that were sewn together, and this one said it had 10 parts, and this one said it only had 5 parts, and then it would have been the same thing. So Ella de life lo katani, but they didn't bring that case. So if they didn't bring that case, hachanami b'shel chuliot lo katani, it must be this is not talking about chuliot either. Ella, Amar Rabbi Meir, second answer. You could theoretically chip off pieces or cut off pieces, or right, if we're talking about metal, you could melt off pieces. Basically, you could end up taking a 5 and a 10. A 5 could be like a 10, in other words, taken out of a 10 one. And it could be that you're talking about the same menorah. Okay, new Mishna. We're going to have 4 cases here. 2 are going to be moda b'miktzah, and 2 are kofer bakol. Okay, so now we're going to have a debate. We're going to have 4 cases, right? Basically, it's 2 different types of cases with 4 different permutations. Okay, hamalvet, let's just start. We have a collateral here. And then what happens? I give you a, right? Hamalvet, chavero ala mashkon. I loan you money, you gave me collateral. Avad hamashkon. And then the collateral was lost. So I lent you money, you gave me the collateral, and I lose the collateral. Amar lo, sela helviticha la v'shekel yashaveh. I said, listen, I loaned you a sela, and the collateral was worth, no, you said you lent me a sela, which is 4 dinarim, and the collateral you claim was worth a shekel, half the value. So that means that how much do you still owe me? You still owe me half, right? The shekel. Oh, sorry. I said it wrong. Let's go back. It's the malva talking here. Was what I said at first. I say I lent you and it was worth a sela, and you say it was only worth a shekel. Okay? You say, okay, it was worth half the amount. So you're basically saying I owe you half. And halaomer loki ala sela vitani alav v'sela yashavet. And you say, what are you talking about? You gave me a collateral. The loan was for a sela, and the amount that the collateral was for a sela. So, patur. Okay? In this case, basically, the borrower does not admit to anything. They don't think they owe me anything. So that's complete denial, and there's no oath. But sela hobitani alav shekel yashavet. I said, listen, I said, I lent you a sela, and it was worth a shekel, same thing. But but the borrower says, lo, ki ela sela hobitani alav. I loaned you a sela, but you say, but it was the collateral was worth 3 dinarim, not 4 dinarim, which is a sela. So basically, you're denying. I claim you owe me, right? I claim you owe me a shekel, 2 dinarim, and you claim you only 1 dinar. That's going to be a moda b'miktzah, and you're chayav. Now, let's say we're going to have a debate about let's say the collateral was worth more than the loan. And then if I lose your collateral, I actually have to return you some money. And then we have a debate about how much money I need to return you. So you start this claim. You say you lent me a sela and it was worth 2 slaim, the collateral. I gave you double the amount, so you owe me a sela. And halaomer, and I say, loki ela sela v'tichalav. I loaned you a sela, but sela yashaveh, the collateral was the exact amount, meaning I don't owe you anything. So I have a complete denial of what you're saying, patur. Okay, I'm exempt from an oath because I deny your claim completely. Sela habitani alav ushtayim yashaveh. I loaned you a sela, but it was worth 2. V'halaomer loki ela sela v'tichalav chamisha dinarim yashaveh. But the other one says, no, it was a sela that you loaned me, but it was worth 5 dinarim. Okay, so now I say, I lent you a sela and you gave me a collateral that was worth 5. It was worth a little more, but not what you say, which was a sela. So I partially deny your claim, chayav. I have to take the oath. So in case number one, the borrower had to take the oath. In other words, in the case where there was an oath. And in the second slew of cases, if there is an oath, it's the malveh who has to take the oath, which makes this next line very confusing. Umi nishba, who takes the oath. Misha pikadon etzlo, the one who has the item with him. Okay, the one who the collateral was in his hands, which really means the lender, the creditor, me, the malveh, which is a little strange because we said the loveh. So we're going to have to get back to this. But right, in one case it was the loveh, in one case it was the malveh. Anyway, let's continue. Shema yishaba zev yotzi alat pikadon. Why do I have to take it? Because if you take the oath and then what happened? I claimed it was lost. You don't know if it's lost or not. I claim it's lost, and now our argument is about what the value of it was. But let's say you take the oath, and then I want to disagree with you, and I pull out. I was just lying, and I really had the collateral. Turns out you took a false oath, right? Like an unnecessary oath. It was a Shevuot because you didn't need to take an oath because the item was actually there. That's why we made me take the oath. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to say ahaya. Okay, let's try to figure out what that line is referring to. Ilema asefa, if it's referring to the final case in the Mishna, but typically the Shevuot gabe malveh. Anyway, the Shevuot is for the malveh because the malveh is the one who's moed b'mitzah. You don't need to tell me it's because he has the pikadon and maybe he'll pull it out. It's because he's the one who's obligated the oath, or she. So Amar Shmuel Aresha. Shmuel says it's talking about the first case when we thought the lova had to take the oath because the lova was moed b'mitzah. Actually, the malveh takes the oath. V'chein amar Rechia bar Rav Aresha. Also, he said it was about the Resha. V'chein amar Rabbi Yochanan Aresha. So we have Shmuel, Rechia bar Abba, and Rabbi Yochanan all saying it's about the first case. So my Resha, which part of the Resha? Well, Sefer the Resha. Obviously, the second part, because the first part there is no oath. What's the second part of the Resha? Again, Sela hoviti chalav v'shekel yashaveh. V'ala omer loki ela Sela vitani alav shlosha dinarim yashaveh chayav. Okay, now in that case, the Shevuot gabe lovehi. So the love had said it was only 3 dinarim, not 4 dinarim. And, right, I'm sorry, not a shekel, not 2 dinarim. And I only owe you 1 more dinar. I don't owe you 2 dinarim. And what did the rabbis do? They said, listen, the love is really supposed to take the oath, but because we're worried about the Shevuot shav, it's a necessary oath. Therefore, we flip it and we give it to the malveh. Remember, we talked about mepach Shevuot, flipping the Shevuot. So we give it to the creditor. So now the Gemara says, wait a minute. Then we heard Rav Ashi who said, that he understood, it was established that that actually both of them take an oath, and they each take a different oath. First, the malveh takes an oath and says, this is not in my property. I really lost it. Then the lova takes the oath about how much it was worth, because there's really 2 things going on here. So each one takes an oath about their own things. So now let's just go back to the beginning of the sentence, because it's in the middle of a phrase. Now that we heard Rav Ashi say this, hachi kamar, this is the way to read the Mishnah. Mi nishbat chila, who takes the oath first? Misha pikadon etzlo, shemi shavazev yotzi alat pikadon. Obviously, first the malveh has to take it because he has the pikadon or she has the pikadon with her. She has to take the oath and say, I don't have it. Once she says I don't have it, then the lova can take the oath about what its value was. Now we're going to start this sugya, which is going to continue into tomorrow's daf, which is a bit of a surprising sugya, I would say, about collaterals. Till now, it sounded like in the Mishnah that if I lose the collateral, then you pay me, right, the difference between what the collateral was worth and what the loan was. But Amar Shmuel, if I lend you 1,000 zuz, and you gave me the handle of a sickle, which is worth way less than 1,000 zuz. If I lose that, I lose my 1,000 zuz. Okay, now, why does he say this? Good question. So collaterals work in 2 possible ways. Either it's just to remember that there's a loan, like to have a record of it somehow, that there's a loan, that I have something of yours, so that can give me the ability to be able to collect it later. Or you could view a collateral as it's already, it's like I'm collecting your loan already, because in the event that you don't pay, I'll keep your collateral. Okay, so what Shmuel is basically saying is, even if it's not worth the value of the loan, right? In that second option, we would say that's more likely if it's worth the value of the loan or close to the value of the loan. But if it's really not, how could that be? What Shmuel's basically saying is, we made this arrangement that I took that in place of, in other words, for me, taking the collateral was like I collected the loan because it's my guarantee that you're going to give me the money back. Why is it my guarantee? Because I know that I can just take out this item and announce to everybody you never pay back your loan. And it would be humiliating to you. And that would be my guarantee that I'm going to get my loan back. It also, by the way, if you give me a collateral, then the Shemitah doesn't cancel the loan. So it's also, right, it's in my best interest to get a collateral, first of all, even if it's not worth the value of the loan, because it is theoretically worth the value of the loan, because it allows me to be able to collect it, both against Shemitah, which cancels my loans, and against someone who might not want to return it. So so basically, according to Shmuel, because it's in place of the loan, if I lose it, then I really lose my right. Okay, it's as if we made this arrangement that I got this, you got that, right? You get the loan, I get the collateral, and if I lose it, then I renege on the loan. It's a bit of a radical opinion. That's Shmuel. Then he just adds the tarte katate lo, but if you have two and you lose one, we're not going to say each one is against half the loan. No, only if you lose both of them do you renege on the loan and basically not have an option to collect it. Rav Nachman Amar, afilu tarte katate. He says, even two, avid chada, avid chameshmea, avid idach, avid kule. Each one is against half the loan. You lose one, you can't collect 500. You lose the other one, you can't collect the rest. Aval kata unaskalo. However, he agrees that if it was a handle of a sickle and a bar of silver, then it's different. Because the bar of silver you clearly gave for its value. So that's going to be against its value. So if I lost the bar of silver, it wouldn't be against half the loan. It would be against whatever the bar of silver is worth, and that part would drop from the loan. And then obviously, if you lose both, though, then you would renege on the loan by losing the handle of the sickle. Nahardia goes even farther to say that in the, right, this is the rabbis of Nahardia, that even a handle of a sickle and a bar of silver, each one is against half the loan. You lose half, you lose half, you lose the other one, you lose the rest. Okay, now we're going to go back to Shmuel, and we're going to bring our Mishnah as a contradiction to Shmuel, because our Mishnah clearly didn't say that. Our Mishnah had a case where there was a mashkon, and it was basically you lost the mashkon and you lost only its value, not the whole loan. So it's none. Here we go with our Mishnah. So here we have, right? It was worth half the loan according to the Malva. It was worth 3/4 of the loan according to the Lova. And now the Lova has to take an oath about the rest. Obviously, the Lova has to return it. But why can't the Lova say, like Shmuel said, which is you got your mashkon and you lost the mashkon, now renege on the loan. You can't collect the rest of it. So how do we explain that? The Mishnah is where you specified specifically that you want it to be according to its value. And Shmuel is talking about if you didn't specify, if you just gave a collateral, we assume the default is that it's in place of the loan completely, even if it's not worth its value. But the Mishnah was talking about a case where when you gave me the collateral, you said this is going to be against half the loan or whatever. It's going to be against its value. You had to have said its value. If you said half, then you couldn't say 3/4 now. But it's when you said this is for its value. Now we're going to try and only start today, continue this into the next daf, which is we're going to try two attempts to say that maybe what Shmuel says is actually based on a machloka between two Tanaim, whether one agrees with Shmuel, one doesn't, okay, and that Shmuel is based on one opinion of a Tanaitic debate. So lema kitanai. So first we'll just start with this Braita, but in the next daf we'll explain better why this Braita or why this Braita we think shows that it's a machloka Tanaim, and then in the end we're going to reject that. Lema kitanai. Let's suggest it's a machloka Tanaim. Hamavet chavero al mashkon va'avad mashkon. If you lend your friend money against a collateral and the collateral is lost, Yishavavi tolam outaf. They swear that it was lost, right? The Malva swears it's lost and then gets its value. Okay? Divrei Rabbi Meir. That sounds like our Mishnah. And it sounds like against Shmuel. Rabbi Akiva Omer. Now, what we don't know yet, and that's what the Gemara is going to try to figure out, which we'll leave for tomorrow, tomorrow's daf, is, right, which will be up soon, but tomorrow's daf, which is if, right, we don't know, is it worth the same value or not worth the same value, okay? But assuming it's not the same value, then Rabbi Eliezer would be against Shmuel, and Rabbi Akiva Omer, the borrower could say, look, you loan me money based on this collateral. You lost the collateral. The loan is done. Aval hamaveh elef zuz b'shtar. But if there was a shtar, now what does a shtar do? Well, a shtar already shows that the shtar is for recording the loan. So we have a record, which means the mashkon can't be for that reason. Remember, we said that's a possible reason. If it's not that, then it's for collection. So if you already have a shtar, v'iniach mashkon biyado, and you left the mashkon, divrei kol avad mashkon of dumautav. Everyone would agree in that case that if you lose the mashkon, you lose your money, because then for sure it's not just to remember, just have a record, because we have the shtar as the record, and then it would be for collection. And then everyone would agree that if you lose it, then you can't collect your loan anymore. But now the question is, right? Is it the value? Is it not the value? And we're going to go through and try to prove which one it is. Try to suggest that maybe this is exactly the case of Shmuel, where it wasn't worth the value of the loan, and that's why we have this machlok. So we'll get back to that in the next daf. What did we do today? We started with all the exemptions where we don't have this oath or different oaths or payments in those 4 categories of items. We saw all the drashot about it. We understood better what the machlok of Rabbi Meir and the rabbis was if something has grapes growing on it and it's not considered like land. Then we did this midah mishkalu b'minyan. We had the machlok of Abaye and Rava how to understand that, and particularly the case, what if I say this house full without count as measurable or not measurable? Then we went to the Mishna about the 4 cases of maval mashkon, which case is it modeh b'miktzah, which case is it not modeh b'miktzah, which case is it an oath, which case isn't. We then learned that one of the cases actually both have to take the oath, because we're worried the malva might just pull it out and create a situation where the lova swore for no reason. And then we got to this unique Shmuel halacha that a mashkon, even if it's not worth the value, could theoretically cancel the entire loan if the malva loses the collateral, the malva loses the rights to collect the loan. And we had 3-way machloket about different details about what if there's 2 items, how that works. And then we tried to explain, knock out Shmuel from the Mishnah, but we resolved that and now suggest that maybe Shmuel is a machloket Tanaim. With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone B'sorot tovot and a safe day and a Shabbat Shalom.